Good morning, ladies and gentlemen in Europe, and good afternoon to all our listeners from Asia. Welcome, everybody, to today's online discussion on global Europe, global expectations, assessing the EU's role in Southeast Asia. My name is Iris Müller, and I'd like to welcome you warmly on behalf of the Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation for Freedom. And today we'd like to talk about the global role of the European Union, also political developments in Southeast Asia, and also EU-ASEAN relations in light of the war against Ukraine. Many scholars argue, and people maybe also feel, that today we are living in a new era of geopolitics. And this new era is characterized by strategic rivalry between authoritarian states such as Russia and China on the one hand, and others, and liberal democracies such as the European Union on the other hand. What we witness today is that our European model of liberal democracy, based on our values such as an open society, on the rule of law, human rights, and market economy, is openly challenged by the growing global influence of authoritarian states with opposed political systems and worldviews. In this context also, the Russian war against Ukraine threatens our international rule-based order. And many people also fear that the EU's model of freedom loses its appeal to others around the world. This is why the Friedrich-Naumann-Foundation for Freedom commissioned the publication Global Europe, Global Expectations, Assessing the EU's Role in the World. And this publication is a series of short policy papers that examine the expectations each world region has of the EU. And it also makes proposals about how cooperation between the EU and other parts of the world can be strengthened. I'll share the publication in the chat in a minute for further reading. And today we're going to discuss the publication segment on Southeast Asia. In the formerly mentioned new era of rivalry and uncertainty, Southeast Asia, of course, plays a crucial geopolitical role. Not only does it represent a large proportion of global GDP, it also features the most crucial maritime trade routes, and it is home to the largest part of the world's population, as we all know. And this is why it has become a strategic battleground for world powers over influence, especially China and the US, but also other powers. The EU, of course, has recognized this strategic importance, especially also with regard to the Russian war on Ukraine. But still, European influence in the region remains rather limited. So how does the region perceive the EU and its values? What are expectations placed on the EU by Southeast Asian countries? And how can Europe deliver on them, finally? How can collaboration be strengthened? What are the opportunities and also challenges for a tighter cooperation between Southeast Asia and the EU? These are going to be some of the leading questions today, and to everybody who is watching, please feel free to add to these during the upcoming hour with questions via the Q&A section, so that we can include your points in the debate as well. And as I said, I'll share the paper in the chat now, and you're more than invited, of course, to also read the other sections of it and join further web talks discussing them. Finally, I'd like to thank everybody on the panel and behind the scenes also who made this web talk possible. And now I hand over to today's moderator, who is it's Dr. Daniela Sacker, and she works as Asia officer in our foundation with focus on Southeast and East Asia, and she is going to lead today's talk. I wish us all an interesting discussion. Thank you very much for joining in, and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Iris, for this overview. I now have the pleasure to introduce Dr. James Gomez. Dr. Gomez is Regional Director of Asia Center. Asia Center was founded in 2015 in Bangkok and serves as a research institute throughout Southeast Asia. In 2021, Asia Center was granted the UN ECOSOC Special Consultative Status. Asia Center provides deep evidence-based knowledge on all issues concerning the region, focusing on human rights, development, and freedom. Its stakeholders are international policymakers, journalists, and NGO partners, such as our Friedrich-Naumann Foundation for Freedom. Dr. Gomez has also pursued an academic career, leading him to lecture in various universities in Asia, Australia, and Europe. Dr. Gomez is a distinguished author of a number of books and articles on human rights, internet surveillance, freedom of expression, and many more. In December 2022, Dr. Gomez contributed his views on global expectations on Europe from the Southeast Asian perspective, which gave way to our today's talk. But before I hand over to Dr. Gomez's keynote, allow me to introduce Dr. Anverushka Jurisch, member of the Deutsche Bundestag for the Liberals FDP. Dr. Jurisch has studied law and has worked for the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development as regional officer for Southeast Asia. In 2005, she moved to Hanoi, Vietnam, where she worked for the German embassy. Dr. Jurisch was executive director in the area of charitable foundations. Within the Deutsche Bundestag, Dr. Jurisch is member of the Committee on European Affairs and member of the first investigative committee to clarify the circumstances surrounding the withdrawal of Bundeswehr troops from Afghanistan. Dr. Jurisch will discuss her views on global expectations on Europe with Dr. Gomez. At this point, I have the great pleasure to hand the microphone to Dr. Gomez for his keynote speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sakat, Iris, Dr. Jurisch. Great to be here. I just have a few slides, which are the representation of the policy brief that was, drafted last year. So since it's been a year and a lot of things have happened, I would like all of us and those present here in the call just to think about two things when we discuss the EU-ASEAN relationship in light of the war in Ukraine. The first thing I recognize, and it has been a constant, is the EU brand is a good brand. And it is a desirable brand across Southeast Asia. I think this, has always been consistent. And there has, in my many years of engagement, I've never seen a rejection or even a disparaging remark about the EU brand. So that's a very, very good place to start with. Yes, the war in Ukraine has had some impact, certainly, but I think I'll also, add the recent over days, the escalation in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as well, because I think it will come to bear in how, EU-ASEAN relations are navigated in the next few years. And next, please. So this is the report, and the link is already there. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Right. So some broad numbers. It's been recognized that ASEAN is the fifth largest economic bloc. It has over 660 million people, 3 trillion USD in GDP. ASEAN itself is cognizant of its strength, and it also is aware that it's a desirable partner. To some extent, this is what makes EU the third largest trading partner. So we spoke earlier about the US-China rivalry. Would ASEAN, then consider EU as the third leg, the third partner? And in the Asia background, we will have to increasingly bring to the front India. So these are the broad elements I'll look at. One, on geopolitics in the EU, two, opportunities for integration, and three, I think the most significant portion of my discussion would be on the values approach. Next, please. So in the geopolitical scheme of things, there is a contestation for the attention of ASEAN. Both China and the US continue to engage. The US in particular is willing to compromise. For example, just days ago, the US reversed its aid policy through US aid to Cambodia. All of this was just an approach not to have Cambodia go deeper into the arms of China. So you have that issue there. So where would EU fit now in its sort of, relations with ASEAN? What's its approach? ASEAN traditionally is, talked about a certain unity, cohesion, trying to, have a certain coherence. I want to suggest that as we talk about ASEAN-EU relation, we are really looking at a very, very divided ASEAN now. Part of it has been prized open by China. China has extreme influence over Laos, Cambodia, and it's creeping around, countries such as Thailand as well. So you no longer have a united ASEAN because, there have been a couple of occasions already where there have been abstentions to an all ASEAN bloc vote, for example, from Cambodia. So what would be the strategy to pursue? Would an FTA approach still be feasible? Given that, globally we are thinking about the risk of economic relationship. And can EU, given its favorable brand position, play the diversification card and reach out to the different countries in ASEAN? So this is a consideration. Next, please. So integration. As I mentioned in the past, the EU was looked very, very much as a great example for integration, especially for standards. Even up to today, the Privacy Act from the EU is always seen as the gold standard in which sort of ASEAN countries should aspire to. I would want to argue that centrality of ASEAN that we mentioned is increasingly slipping away, simply because of the divisions and incursion caused by China. So I'm not sure, even if it all holds together, how well it would move going forward. So in that regard, what would it be in terms of the engagement process from the EU, right? So that is also something to look about. Is it better for the EU to engage ASEAN as a bloc? Is that real? Or would it be better off engaging strategically with selected partners within ASEAN? So those are, realpolitik consideration. And last but not least, finally, the next slide. The values-driven approach. So we, as the moderator and introducer framed it up front, I think the way the EU can, make a brand differentiation, add a value proposition, is look at the way it brings values at the center, such as human rights, labor rights, environmental issues, gender mainstreaming, and all of that. But what is the lived experience? I think what we see in the last recent years is the EU is trying to take a more pragmatic approach. I would argue, to some extent, the EU and the more sort of influential members of the EU have taken a more pragmatic approach and not led by values. I want to argue that. Perhaps the advantage here would be whether you want to reset the approach with values prerogative, or you're going to think about saying, hey, if we can't beat them, let's join them. So values compromised approach. And I think that's the big dilemma facing the EU. Positive as a brand, it is desirable as it is as a partner for the region. Is all of ASEAN approach the practical approach, or should it take a country level approach? And is there a self-reflection to see whether it's on values, or have the values been, sort of watered down? Keep going, please. Thanks. To the next slide. Yeah. So in short, ASEAN-EU relationship is best viewed in a wider geopolitical lens, meaning, look at India, its influence as well, at the current, Israel-Palestinian conflict. There are multiple actors. I want to suggest ASEAN is also fragmented. There are different values, obviously, but are we being, sort of literally bullied, or are we self-compromising to not, follow values such as, human rights? Opportunities and challenges, I think that has to be strategic. I think if you go for all of ASEAN approach, I think that'll be problematic. I think the opportunity lies in the strategic country level partnership. What can we do? I think it's not about what can you do. I think there are many things that can be done. There are a lot of youth activities, but one thing I will say that it was quite fashionable until before COVID, especially from the EU side, to support EU-ASEAN centers and have activities around that. I want to sort of bring attention to the listeners here. You don't hear much of that anymore. And also, the universities are no longer centers of influence. Influence is out there in the social media. Influence is, captured by new and innovative organizations that can bring their messaging across directly to the market. So I would suggest to push some of the EU messaging, not through the traditional, I would even argue, archaic methodologies of the universities and EU-ASEAN centers, but look at new sites of dissemination and values engagement. So I think I'll pause here and then hand the time back to the moderator.
Thank you, James, for this very thorough presentation, which of course raises more questions than answers. And I, at this point, would like to hand over to Anne-Veruschka Jurisch. James Gomez mentioned the EU is understood as a brand, but my question would be, is the EU seen as a community of values, united and stable enough to actually serve an example? Can we address the EU as a brand from your side?
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you also from my side to you, James, for your great talk and presentation. And I have taken a lot of notes because I think there are many crucial points you have said. Thank you for your question regarding the value-based community, and also if the EU is a brand. And I would say yes, very much so, that the EU is a brand and also an appreciated partner. But of course, we also face a little bit a similar issue as ASEAN has, that we are, of course, a club of different countries. And but what differentiates us very much from ASEAN is that we have a set of rules to which we adhere. We have the Treaty of the EU, which is values-based, which some countries, unfortunately, are not always aware of within the EU, and where we have to work on. We have some supranational, we have intergovernmental, we have the EU Parliament, we have a certain pooling of sovereignty. So this differentiates us a lot from ASEAN, and which also makes talks between the two blocks, if you want, a little bit different, because the EU can talk as one body, whereas ASEAN is far a looser organization. So yes, we are a brand, and we should definitely take this way also to foster our own strategic priorities as the European Union, and use it strategically because we have this value.
James, would you like to respond straight away? Or?
I just reinforce the idea of the brand. I think the brand has a positive vibe. I mean, and the vibe is emotional, as opposed to an intellectual understanding of values that it's right space. So when I say it's a positive brand, it suns an awareness of it being right space. So what does the brand really mean emotionally? What it really means, it's pleasant. It's different from China. It's different from the US. It's not brash. It's polite. And it's just comfortable to deal with, people from the key interlocutors from the EU countries are seen as pleasant to deal with, and very different from their counterparts from China and the US. So I would say the brand value is a positive emotional one, but not necessarily implies that there is an understanding the brand is a right space.
Okay. You mentioned also that the Asian states have a strong need for national sovereignty. Could you please elaborate on that? Is that national sovereignty felt as a need that arises from the population, or is it rather a politically desired separation or division of the region?
I think when you talk about Southeast Asian countries, and it may be applicable to I guess all countries, you will have, let's pick one country in Southeast Asia. Let's call it country X. The first thing to do is to understand who are the people running the country. Is it a singular elite, or is it a competing elite? I think this is the sociology of political elites in Southeast Asia, and we need to understand that, because Asian states are captured by the elites. Singapore is a country of a singular elite. If you engage with anyone connected to the Singapore, elite, you will experience what is called the uniform speak. They all speak the same. They share the same values because they keep the system alive. Whereas if you go to Thailand, Indonesia, or Philippines, or Malaysia, you have competing elites. They compete to capture the state. So they can, like in the Thai case, capture the state so they can extract resources. And hence we have issues of corruption and things like that. So this is the reality. So it is not, coming from a philosophical idea of sovereignty, but rather it's the elite. They want to capture the state for financial and political benefit and longevity. And when we talk about political elites in Southeast Asia, we are literally talking about families, political dynasties, right? And how corruption can continue through dynastic control. So that's really what we are talking about. I think we cannot apply the Enlightenment period of the nation, the state, and sovereignty to contemporary Southeast Asia, because it's an elite capture. Yeah. So when you are speaking to someone of influence in Southeast Asia, the first question to ask or to analyze is, what part of the elite structure do they come from and who do they represent?
Okay, thank you for this very profound answer. I here would like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Please feel free to type in your questions and I will take them to our guests. But in the meantime, Dr. Jurisch, I have a question for you, because we talked so much about values, and the European values always have an impact on internal politics of the various countries, member countries as well. Now, if we talk of a pragmatic approach to FTA, how much do you think would each individual European country be ready to make compromises on core issues such as environmental or human rights or deforestation? How do you think would we talk of palm oil industry, for example, if we had to take compromises into internal politics within the country?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, because it also links directly up with what you, James, have just mentioned. Because if we want actually to de-risk, or if you want decouple from China and to collaborate with other entities such as ASEAN as a bloc, or also with individual countries in those blocs, there is also a certain dilemma within it, because few of those countries are fully fledged democracies, and as James you have just mentioned, you have the dilemma of elites being in power, as you have described it, and also that ASEAN as a bloc has a far more pragmatic approach to things, because it's not a supranational national entity. So to what extent, coming to your question, is realism and also having realistic views on FTAs necessary and also possible if we want to engage, and also if we have to engage if we want to de-risk from China. So to what extent is there readiness within countries to make compromises on things such as environmental issues and human rights and all these things with regard to FTAs? If we do want to de-risk and to engage deeper with other regions of the world, I think we need to take FTAs as what they are. They are trade agreements, and we should not overload and overregulate them, because then what will be the result is that they won't take place, and this is not what we desire, not from a strategic point of view, but also not from the point of view of trade. So within the EU, we need to have this conversation. What can we realistically implant into trade agreements? And I think as the situation, also the security situation worldwide is getting tighter, we have to be realistic in this point, and I do hope that we find majorities within the European Union without neglecting, of course, talks and conversations, and also bluntness with regard to human rights issues and also environmental things. But I think trade agreements are a great basis to have these talks, but we should make them happen, and not trying to overburden them with all sorts of other issues.
Thank you. James, we were learning that EU members have by no means uniform expectations of a foreign common policy. How from the Asian point of view, what would you wish the EU does to gain your credibility and gain your trust?
As Anne has just said correctly, they're pragmatic. So if you come to them with the FTA approach without, adding other elements that divert from the principles or the benefits of the FTA, which is a trading agreement, I think you can cross the line quite well and quite easily. However, if you still want to, pursue the values dimension, my recommendation would really be to, at the same time, use other instruments. For example, engagement with think tanks or civil society groups, that can come, simultaneously, but not pegged directly to the conditions of the FTA. So that could be a bit of a win-win here. But I want to maybe just sharpen the way forward. I'll give you an anecdotal example. So every year, Asia Center is based in Bangkok. It's a regional office, and every year, the EU mission will make an announcement that it's opening up, calls for proposals for, civil society, IGOs, and all of that for the once-a-year funding. But it will begin with a briefing. So when you go into the briefing, what you find is you'll find international NGOs also in the room, competing for funds, which I think should be ring-fenced for local organizations, whether they are national or regional. So, and I think that is something the EU could do, because if you are providing funds for development, whether it's climate change issue, gender mainstreaming, or digital security, because many civil society actors use the digital space. But if the regional groups and national groups will have to compete with an INGO, sitting in the same room as the EU briefing, and that's the reality year in and year out, then it doesn't really work. So that's a kind of a calibration. So in short, yes, FTA, keep it business, keep it trade, don't cloud the issue, but on the side, I think you need to move simultaneously if you are interested in a values-based approach. But if you think values are no longer important in the scheme of things, you want to be pragmatic, well, that'll also be up to you. But this is just an observation.
May I jump in on that? Yes, thank you. Yeah, James, I would just like to add on what you have said and also underline it, that there are probably also additional fora where to foster values. For example, our Minister for Justice, Marco Buschmann, he had a talk, he has fostered legal cooperation of the judiciaries of countries at the G7 meeting in Tokyo this year, bringing in also the ASEAN ministers of justice. I think this is a great initiative, and we should have a whole mesh of such initiatives also to mark more presence within the ASEAN region. And we should, on the other hand, also be aware that presence by no means should mean security presence as a main thing, because we should very much be aware that for ASEAN countries, because as I have, my understanding is that there is a very subtle balance between all the powers in the region and also globally, and that ASEAN does not really want to have the regions securitized and being over securitized. So we should find a very good balance between trade, also security, and the values, and this will be crucial that we put the ASEAN and also the Indo-Pacific region, although ASEAN does not really like the notion so much, as a strategic priority for the European Union to get more presence in the region, because so far the brand is great, but is a bit undervalued.
Yes, I agree. And I think the security dimension is, as far as the EU is concerned, is left unspoken. I mean, the popular thinking is, it's too far, and you don't have historical connection. I mean, Beijing bases, military engagements and all of that in the manner some of the other countries do. So for you to kind of come in, be building from scratch, it will take a lot of cost and, all of that. So yeah, trade is certainly one big thing. And of course, standards across, doing things properly, doing things well. Golden standards, that's always something the EU is looked out for. And I want to just pick up one thing and that you mentioned about the ministers, judges, and so on. So again, I want to underline this elite capture, right? If you're only speaking to the elites, and often they will be singular elites, because in a country where the competing elites compete and is captured by one, so it is still a singular elite. Now, in that room, if you do not have alternative voices, it's a failed meeting. I've, over the many couple of decades that I've attended meeting, and only as recent as just a couple of weeks ago in KL, where it was a law meeting, and you have people from the Human Rights Commission, law councils, the bar, so on and so forth. For some countries, it was just a singular voice. And suddenly you have these elites articulating a set of values that actually is not matched by the values on the ground, because people reject some of the elites' values. It's just that they don't have the political pathway, or their voices has been suppressed through censorship and so on and so forth. So if you look around you and you do not have a diverse view from a particular country, and if you only go to a meeting where you have a singular, the uniform speak, right? I'm from Singapore, so I'll take liberties to talk about Singapore. If you're going to a meeting about Singapore and you do not have an alternative voice, and you are only speaking to the ambassador, the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, the trade union, all captured by a singular elite, and you're only listening to uniform speak, something is wrong right there, right? And do you have the ability, right, to include a different voice in the room? So that's the challenge I think you have moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, James, for pointing out the necessity to question forms of discussing when there are only official people on the other side. And of course, this is also true for European countries, but very much more so in the context of ASEAN, where there are very different and difficult countries being part of it. I just think of Myanmar, for example, which is also a member of ASEAN, but also others which are definitely not fully fledged democracies. And I think we both need, we need, on the one hand, we need a certain realism if we want to de-risk from China and get more deeply involved with ASEAN. But on the other hand, we also need more knowledge and also more people-to-people connectivity, meaning although you have said universities are no longer so much the main focus for getting information across, but we need to teach students from Germany, from France, about the region, about the differences in those countries, also about the realities, how this so important region functions. So I'm so much in favor of fostering more knowledge here on the European side, but also getting more people to live in the ASEAN region, but also people from ASEAN countries to come to Europe, so that there is much more of an exchange, which I think is really crucial. So this would be also one point which I would hope going forward, that we have more exchange and more mutual knowledge.
I would like to take the discussion a little broader now. We all woke up this morning going to our phones first and watching the latest news from what is happening around us. Now, talking of EU and Asian countries and what we can do is an important approach, but we do have the wars waging all around us. One big fear from the Asian side, of course, is that it dilutes our European efforts to come across. But does it open new spaces to a multipolar world vision? How can we react within the wars and the problems going around us? Maybe first Dr. Gomez and then Dr. Jurich.
Yeah, I think the region and just philosophically, talking about academia, political thinking, I think there's clearly a shift to a multipolar thinking. Definitely, I think even if we go right to the ground, the conversations is we're living in a polar world. But I guess Daniela, I think the subtext of what you were saying is, but is the right information getting to the people from all communities? So one of the challenges, if I may just flip it around, is really whether people are getting right information, because we have so much disinformation about the wars. And I think we haven't, when we talked about the EU-ASEAN relationship, we did, previously the messaging was quite clear. Now your messaging needs to come from multiple sources. So that's why I made that point about previously, you can engage with government, you can engage with mainstream media, you could do a press release, high-level visits, and then of course you get the intelligence here to also articulate certain positions, and the establishment of the ASEAN EU centers in many countries, were quite effective. I was very active in some of the earlier years, but the messaging is no longer coming through those places. They are coming through TikTok. They are coming through all different types of fragmented social media platforms. They are coming from new innovative groups who use social media to articulate their position. At the same time, what many people are not aware, there's also a lot of face-to-face meeting that's taking place, because social media, you can only do so much. So we have also shifted from building large coalitions and communities for messaging, and we are going for very niche, partnerships, so that we can, maintain strong relationship. So coming back to your question, Daniela, yes, the reality on the ground is that it is a multipolar world, and everybody is getting ready for that reality. The EU is seen as part of one of the multipolars, and I think there is enough goodwill to engage as well. But I think you also need to watch out for is where you are going to get the messaging across. I think there needs to be a shift, and I don't see, because I live through my work on social media and all of that, face-to-face meetings, small groups meetings, within the region and beyond. I don't see that EU messaging, branding taking place on those forums. They're very much stuck, just like the Japanese. They're stuck in the old traditional pillars of messaging, and they cannot shift. And I think if you want to move your conversation forward, especially and what you were saying about the approach to FTA and all of that, that needs to come from different communication platforms. Yeah.
Anverushka, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as you have rightly pointed out, the degree of complexity and also the dangerousness of the world we are just living in have probably triggered somewhat complementary or different shifts. If you look at ASEAN on the one hand and the EU on the other hand, I think within ASEAN, as much as I can judge from the outside, is more anxious to keep through the balancing between the powers and not to lean too much to one side, because for the region it's crucial not to have too many tensions, and the strategy to reach this aim is to balance between everyone. And so this stresses the need for this balancing. Whereas the EU is trying to build on multilateralism and also to strengthen the existing fora for negotiations within the UN system, and also a values perspective, as we have discussed in the beginning. On the other hand, we have to see to what extent we can combine those two worlds, to what extent is pragmatism okay? Do we have other fora to foster values and value-based views? I think this is crucial. And on the other hand, I'm quite happy what the EU does. We have 45 years of cooperation with ASEAN. We have the strategic partnership. We have the Indo-Pacific strategy. Whereas in Germany, to speak a little bit about my own country, we have now at least a national security strategy, which is good. But there, the whole Indo-Pacific region, not to mention ASEAN specifically, is only mentioned in one sentence. So I think we still have to be aware how important the region for us is, especially if we want to de-risk and maybe also decouple. I'm not a friend of decoupling, but de-risking. So I think with regard to de-risking, we are in the same boat with ASEAN. We want to de-risk and to balance, but the routes we take differ a little bit because we come from different angles.
And then maybe another question on the role of Europe to both of you. James, would you rather see individual countries of Europe act within ASEAN, or do you expect the EU to find a way of speaking with one voice? And to Anverushka Juric, the same question from the European perspective. Do you think the individual states, and especially speaking for Germany, should be more active by itself, or should it try and find a common European way to answer all those questions? Please, James, first.
Yeah, what I see in reality on the ground is really a two-step approach. There is that EU brand and that EU push that comes from the missions across the region, and also some activities and so on that are convened in that manner, you know, under the EU flag or brand and so on. So you have that. And then you have underneath a range of countries that are acting. Germany is quite a big one. So it can have two bites at the cherry, so to speak, through the EU and then also through Germany. France also does that, but not so visibly clear as Germany in Southeast Asia. Surprisingly, you'll find some of the smaller countries also engaging bilaterally as well. So this is our lived reality of engagement with EU and its member states. So it's always two-pronged. So that's what I see. I think it's a good model. I don't see it changing any significantly in any way. And of course, the engagement comes based on capacity, interest, resources, and all that.
Yes, I think it is possible that the European as a bloc is going forward, for example, in the field of trade, but also security. But of course, the EU has to be driven by big countries within the bloc, and Germany, of course, could and should and is in the should be or is also in the driver's seat. For example, with regard to trade, we need to make clear what our position is in that field. To what extent do we want to have a lot of issues within trade agreements or not? So this has to be a little bit of a clarity, which we have to push forward also from the German side. But also nationally, we have a lot of levers in our hand. As I have mentioned in the beginning, it's not only about trade and security, but it's also about people-to-people connectivity and knowledge. This is something which we can foster in our schools, in our universities. I think this is very important. And another thing where Germany can also play a crucial role is regard to strategic foresight. If we had a National Security Council, which so far we do not, but which is the Liberal Party, the FDP, is pushing forward, such as National Security Council, I would assume, would recommend very strongly that we should deepen our ties with ASEAN as an organization and with the wider region and specifically. So I'm very sure that such a body would make such recommendations, and so this is why we push forward to have a National Security Council.
Thank you. So I don't have any questions from the audience, but I do have a morning wish. Could you, each of you, give us an optimistic thing that we can hand to our audience, and one optimistic thought for the day that we can start the day with? Maybe I start with Veruška Juriš this time.
Yes, actually, I had the same wish this morning in another completely different topic, but I think the urgency to have optimistic views these days is very high, and I can fully understand it. But with regard to the topic of EU-ASEAN relations, it's easy for me because I think ASEAN, the countries there, the people there are wonderful. It's a great region, and it's so much chance and perspective involved to get to know this region and to get to know the people, the cultures. So we can only gain in that respect. So we should go forward and have more people-to-people connectivity, to meet, to gain more knowledge. And I think we have a lot of mutual chances in deepening those ties.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I think there's a lot of good things already going. A lot of which Anne has already.
I think we have a connection problem. James Gomez, we don't hear you.
See that already as a win, but what I would suggest really, and just again picking up on Anne's terminology, people to people, I would look towards the EU and also Germany in particular, also the Naumann-Stiftung, which I'm very familiar with, to actually enlarge the people to people interaction, and at least there you can take a values-based approach. Because if you compromise there, then the fundamentals are kind of affected. So that's one like real thing that we can move forward on. Enlarging the people-to-people approach on a value base, and also increasingly look at non-traditional partners, such as looking at who are the new organizations out there, how they are doing it, what is the role of technology in engaging with values, communications, and so on. So I think that's kind of where I see positive potential, building on what's already there. Like I said, it's a good brand, it's a stable brand, it's desirable, but we are also dealing with issues of disinformation, miscommunication. how can we then strengthen that in new innovative ways? Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. James Gomez. Thank you, Dr. Anverushka Juric, for giving us your time this morning and for sharing with us your ideas and your thoughts. Thank you to the audience to have joined us in this morning. I would like to give just a little outview of what's coming next from this series, Europe Global Expectations. That will be then the perspective from Sub-Sahara Africa. And the event will take place always online on Thursday, November 9 in the afternoon, 6 to 7 p.m. The event is not online as far as I know yet, but please watch out for it on the FNF web shop, or if you are on our list, you will get an invitation soon. Thank you to all of you. Please all have a safe day, have a good day, and see you soon.